And to discuss this, we're joined by the Executive Director, International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade. Lanre, good evening to you. Thank you so much for coming to our studio.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Okay, so having listened to the investigative journalist right there, how do you feel looking at the incidents that actually highlight the risks and challenges that investigative journalists go through in Nigeria to even start with, particularly when it comes to exposing sensitive issues like this? We're talking about oil bunkering, illegal oil bunkering as the case is, and the several issues that these journalists have had to unravel.
Well, I think there are about three major takeaways from the unfortunate and experience of Fisayo Soyombo. The first is that what he did serves as a proof that the Nigerian media is always willing to help the Nigerian nation to unravel corruption, to expose abuses at different levels, and essentially to ensure that our nation moves forward. So the motive behind this entire investigation, up to and including confiding in the army that he was doing this investigation, was essentially to help, nip in the bud some of the key problems affecting, our nation. And so when people say that journalism in Nigeria is dead, nothing is happening, and some of us keep saying that there are younger journalists who are trying to revive or uphold the tradition of investigative journalism, this serves, as a proof. The second point is that you have a situation where an investigative journalist is not just taking it upon himself to act alone, but also letting the authorities know that this is the extent I want to go to convince you or to provide evidence that this is the problem we have on our hand. And in that kind of situation, you would expect some level of confidentiality. We might say on the one hand that perhaps, well, maybe Fisayo is too, maybe he's, youthful exuberance, perhaps thinking that he could actually trust, these elements. Don't forget that if it were to be the other side, because there are times when authorities confide in journalists and say, these are the things we want to do, but we are providing this information in confidence. In which case, on the basis of professional ethics and on the basis of ethics of journalism and professional standards, you are not supposed to breach that agreement, to disclose that information. Okay. It's an extension when we talk about protection of success. But we have a situation from what he has said that everything he had confided in the authorities were known to the supposed bunkerers, and that put him in a kind of dilemma. So for me, the third point about this is it just shows that we're in a very precarious situation, and it's like a kind of no-win situation, or head of tail you lose for the Nigerian journalists. On the one hand, they say, well, if you want to help the nation, use your tools to expose these things. You expose it, and in the process, you are exposed. It becomes highly embarrassing.
So even if we may also, blame the enforcers of the law, would you want to put the blame at the doorstep of the government? Because we're looking at a democratic dispensation in a country where we've seen investigative journalists or whistleblowers being arrested, being hunted, being picked up at several locations, whereby the information that they are sharing with the public should have been verified by either government itself or its parastatals or maybe ministries and departments. And we've seen that trend occur, for some time now. How would you, blame, or how would you even describe it? Is it a function or a dysfunction of government? Would you put the blame at the doorstep of the government, or maybe there are other factors at play here?
Well, okay, so when we say government is very broad, but we're dealing with an institution in this instance, the army. And what I would just say is that at the level of the army, what happened shouldn't have happened. Because apparently there was prior knowledge that this journalist was going to carry out this investigation. And let us assume that for whatever purpose, he had to get arrested along others. There was no reason for him to have stayed in detention for 3 days because it was an open secret, so to say, that this is an investigative, journalist. There's also the other dimension of this conversation that we need to look into. And some of us keep expressing worry that we're in a civilian dispensation, we're in a democracy, but you keep seeing the army everywhere. Does the army have the power to, because we're dealing with an internal security situation. This is not an external war being waged against Nigeria, and the army goes there, arrests civilians as they were, and apparently kept in military detention. It could also be otherwise if the army effected this arrest and said, well, we suspect these people of this and this offense, and we are handing them over to the police, which is the institution legally empowered to carry out arrest, detention, and investigation when it comes to civilians. Even at that, you are expected to, whatever investigation, whatever you are doing, within 24 hours to go to the court to say that we have this suspect and this is the case we have against that. So when you look at it from different dimensions, you begin to see a lot of things that are actually wrong with the way they went about arresting and detaining for 3 days Fisayo Soyombo, who from all accounts probably would not be free today if there had not been a kind of media opera, the traditional media and the social media over his arrest and detention.
Okay, so now that we are talking about press freedom, we're talking about freedom of information bill, so to speak, how do we ensure that journalists are protected and are supported during the course of their duties?
So for about 2 years now, we've been talking about the need for us to have in this country a national mechanism on safety of journalists and press freedom. And it's not an invention, it's something that has happened in other countries, because there are so many instances where the work of the journalists, in a sense, overlaps or aids or assists the work of the security agencies in their work. That's why but when you talk about investigative journalism, it's more or less like detective work. You are trying to help the society to expose wrongdoings, to expose abuses of power. And so we felt that because we keep having these instances of attacks, of arrests, can we then work towards this kind of mechanism where state institutions, particularly the security agencies, commit to following the best practices or best standards internationally established in relating with journalists? Maybe if we have that, this kind of situation would not arise. But we're worried that increasingly we see abuse of press freedom, the violation of the rights of journalists in different circumstances. And it does not speak well of democracy, because we're getting to a stage where if you are doing some comparison, you probably will be thinking that maybe even the media was in a sense better off. We're not saying military government was better than democracy or is better, but that when you look at what we're going through, because between 1999 and now, we're looking at documentations that show that not less than 500 incidents of attacks on journalists or violation of press freedom has occurred between 1999 and now.
Okay. So finally, Lanre, to just wrap up, for journalists themselves during the course of their duty, because earlier when you talked about exuberance, so to speak, how can they also ensure that they are safe while doing their job? Words of advice to them.
Well, we have a lot of safety protocols. There are a number of, there's even no agreement within the media as to the methodologies that journalists could use, particularly when it comes to undercover, so at the end of the day, it depends on the individual journalist, the amount of risk you want to take and the courage you want to, demonstrate. But it's also important for journalists to know that journalism is potentially hazardous. They need to take their safety, seriously. If you are going on dangerous assignments, let your colleagues know. At least let somebody in the profession that you can confide in know, because it's not everything that you also want to disclose. So these safety trips are available, and it's one of the things that the International Press Center has invested in over a period of time, and a number of international organizations. So my advice would be that for journalists who are committed to investigative reporting, they should also know that It goes along with their personal safety, and it will be good for them to be abreast of some of these, safety tips. But no matter what we say about our safety, the personal consciousness of the journalists, it is the responsibility of the government to provide the enabling environment for journalists to do their work.
Lanre Arogundade, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm Executive Director, International Press Center. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you very much.